Well, hello everyone and welcome to Insight with Political Tours and Beyond the Headlines. Our guest today is Marwan Muasher, a Jordanian diplomat and academic whose career gives him a unique insight into the region. He's been foreign minister to Jordan, served as ambassador to both the United States and Israel. He now works at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Hello Marwan, welcome to Insight. And where are you joining us from today?
Hi, Nicholas. I am from Amman, Jordan, where I've been for the last 8 months.
Okay, in lockdown, sort of unable to move around.
Exactly.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, for want perhaps of a better phrase. What future is there for it? We're also going to speak a bit about Jordan, which is having a tough time with COVID-19 and was already dealing with challenging circumstances to start with. We'll take your questions in about 20 minutes time. Do start writing them in the Q&A box here below, and then we'll come to you and we'll open your microphones up so you can put your questions directly to Marwan. Let's get going. Just to start with, let's speak about recent developments. Both the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain have signed agreements recognizing Israel. What's the significance of this, Marwan?
The agreements have a lot of significance. Some of them have to do with the peace process, but most of them really have to do with bilateral interests between Bahrain, the Emirates, and Israel. In other words, whereas the agreements have been painted as peace agreements, they really don't have much to do with peace. All the other peace agreements with Israel were based on the land for peace principle. Israel withdrawing from occupied territory in return for peace. The Arab Peace Initiative, which was passed unanimously in 2002 by all Arab states, promised Israel a collective peace agreement in return for Israel withdrawing from all occupied territories. These agreements are based on peace for peace, not land for peace. And so while they may further bilateral interests between the countries involved and actually publicize what already has been a lot of cooperation between each of Bahrain and the United Emirates with Israel, they do not necessarily advance the cause of peace, in the sense that, in my view, Israel today feels it no longer has to talk to the Palestinians whom they occupy if they can sign peace agreements with the wider Arab world that does not involve an agreement with the Palestinians. Israel can have the cake and eat it. And that is, in my view, one of the dangers, at least as it regards the peace process, that not only do we not have a peace process because of these agreements, but the two-state solution, that the whole premise of negotiations between Arabs and Israelis was based on, the two-state solution today appears not only in jeopardy, but almost dead.
Yeah, okay. I want to come on to that idea in just a second, but it would seem to me that there are two things going on here. You've got Israel pushing to annex part of the West Bank and with the United States essential backing, and at the same time courting Arab nations and getting recognition. So you talk about Netanyahu having his cake and eating it. In that sense, he's achieving on both fronts, and it seems quite an incredible feat.
In the short term, I agree with you, Nicholas. Israel is able to achieve both. Sign agreements with not all the Arab world, of course, but with certain Arab countries, and also be able to annex parts of the West Bank that Israel is interested in. In the long term, Israel is not necessarily the winner, in the sense that if there is no two-state solution, as appears to be the case today, both because of annexation and the Trump plan, as well as because of these agreements, if there is no two-state solution, meaning there is no Palestinian state on Palestinian territory, and if in addition to that, Israel is not interested, as you assume it is not, in having a Palestinian majority in areas under its control. And today, according to Israeli official statistics, you have a Palestinian plurality. 6.9 million Palestinians living in areas under Israel control, that is Israel proper, the West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem, versus 6.6 million Israeli Jews. You have 300,000 to 400,000 of Israelis who are neither Jews nor Arabs. What that means is that over time, if it becomes clear that there is no two-state solution, the Palestinians will have the only choice left to them, which is to start, asking for equal rights. And the international community is going to be put in a situation, and soon in my view, where it cannot keep saying no to a Palestinian state and no to equal rights. That means yes to apartheid, which is, not a sustainable solution. So in the short term, it appears, in my view, that Israel is, winning it all. In the long term, both Israel and the international community will have to come to terms with this fact. In other words, it doesn't matter whether you sign peace agreements with 2 or 10 Arab states. If you are not able to deal, with the people living amongst you and come to terms with a solution between both communities, then the whole conflict is going to shift from focusing on the shape of the solution, whether it is 1 state, 2 states, or what have you. It is going to shift to a rights-based approach where Palestinians are going to increasingly demand equal political rights.
Yeah. I want to go back over that because there's quite a lot to consume in some ways. So the two-state solution is essentially dead because Israel and the US are not ready to recognize a Palestinian state within the confines of the West Bank. A Palestinian state is also dead because Israel's not is only ready to recognize a very restricted form of state that the Palestinians are unhappy with, and then you get to a state in which the Palestinians living within Israel are a very sizable population and essentially are going to be pushing for equal rights. And that's whether you have a rights-based approach or you have something like the arguments about equal rights in the United States, or you're talking about apartheid in South Africa as parallels. So those are those sort of 3 logical steps, and I get that. But in terms of arguing what is just for the Palestinians, doesn't it seem that the Israelis they've got the backing of the United States on their side? They haven't had to make any necessary compromises to address these issues. So you could have a situation in which you talk about Palestinians striving for equal rights, but this might go on for decades.
It will go on for decades. Let's, Nicholas, look at the situation of the Palestinians inside Israel, the ones that did not leave Palestine in 1948. Today, there are 1.7, 1.8 million people. Today, they have 15 seats in the Knesset. 5 times greater than the Labour Party in Israel. Who would have even thought that 20 years ago, that the Labour Party would be reduced to 1/5 the number of seats that the Arabs inside Israel have? Today, the Arabs inside Israel are calling for equal rights within, the Israeli system. And they comprise around 20% of the population. But if you add to that, the Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza, they become 50%. And in 10 years, they become 60%. And then, whether it's 10 years or 20 years down the road, we can argue the numbers. But the end result is the same. When 60% of the population ask for equal rights, the international community is not going to be able to stand against what is a very logical conclusion if there is no Palestinian state. If there is no Palestinian state.
But my point, Marwan, is that Israel has managed that pretty well thus far. I mean, you can speak to Israeli military leaders and they'll say to you, look, this is unsustainable. We don't want our boys, essentially policing Palestinian areas. We think we need to find some kind of situation. And I think there was a very good film also with the head of Israeli internal security, in which 5 out of the 6 former heads of Israeli internal security argued that Israel was going in the wrong direction, and you do need a Palestinian state in order to avoid this situation. But by and large, politically within Israel, the calculation has been a different one in that they can afford to have a military occupation in the West Bank. What's more, politically, you need to annex it to shore up your right-wing base. Therefore, nothing is going to happen, even though that it's unjust for the next 50 years or so.
I don't think it's 50 years. I mean, Israel has been so far able to manage the situation, as you said. One, because there is a promise somewhere within the international community of a two-state solution. There are a number of international, UN resolutions. The whole international community has been working since Oslo for a two-state solution. There is a promise for a two-state solution. And as a result, the international community has looked the other way, if you will, when Israel has violated human rights, when Israel basically is today, not in the future, behaving as an apartheid system, where you have supremacy for the Jewish members of the state, and then everybody else is treated at best as second-class citizens. The ones under occupation, not even citizens. The other reason why they've been able to get away with it is because the number of Arabs were, not a majority. Today, we have achieved parity among the two communities. As I said, the number of Palestinian Arabs today is equal or more than the number of Israeli Jews. So if you combine these two factors, that one, you have achieved parity, and two, that the promise of a Palestinian state on Palestinian soil is gone. And today, I mean, the Israeli Prime Minister openly states that there won't be a Palestinian state, not today and not in the future. If that promise is gone, then the majority on the land is going to opt for the next best thing, which is equal rights. Then I'm not sure that Israel is going to be able to get away with it. There are a number of polls, even within the United States public. The latest poll has shown that if there is no two-state solution, 67% of the US public would support a state with equal rights, even if it means it is no longer a Jewish state. That's very significant. That's today. What about 10 years or 15 or 20 years from now? It's going to be awfully difficult for anyone to argue against equal rights if there is no two-state solution.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm saying is the moral argument is on your side. Many people would agree with that, but the realpolitik is that domestic politics in the United States dictates that there's always going to be support for Israel, and that's unlikely to change soon. How do you see? Let's say the Trump administration goes. This has been the most pro right-wing Israeli government in the States for in history. Would you see things changing with the Biden administration? What would be your hopes there?
Well, with regard to the Middle East, there will be changes, but not many. I mean, Biden is not going to endorse the Trump plan, obviously. Biden is not going to endorse annexation. Biden is probably going to restore financing for UNRWA, the UN agency responsible for Palestinian refugees. But he's not going to be able to reverse the decision to move the embassy to Jerusalem. And in my view also, I'm not sure how much attention Biden is going to give to a peace process, to a revived peace process, where negotiations have proved not to be of any value. I think that his first priority is going to be devoted to restoring, domestic trust in an America that has changed considerably since Trump came to power. It has become very partisan, very divided. And I think any new president, if it is not, if Biden wins, not Trump, is going to devote a lot of energy towards the domestic situation rather than towards the peace process.
Yeah, I get that. Okay, well let's I'm going to prompt some questions now. So please, everyone, if you're listening, and please do start writing your questions in the Q&A box there, and then we can come to those fairly quickly. Let's change tack slightly. So just moving away from the States, not much change there, you think, in the short term, just trying to steady the relationship with allies that have been damaged in the past, and looking at the caring possibly more about domestic politics in the US. So not a lot of time spent on the Middle East peace process. Let's turn to Jordan now. What has happened with COVID-19, and perhaps give some background on the difficult situation that Jordan was already in, reliant on foreign aid to a significant degree. 1.2 million refugees, I think I'm right, from Syria. Those are considerable worries, and also an economy that's heavily state dependent.
Well, let's remember that, or the first point I want to make is that COVID-19 did not result in the economic distress that Jordan is witnessing. It has deepened it. In my view, things started going down in 2014 when oil prices went below $100 a barrel. And as a result, both the oil era in the Arab world started declining, but also Gulf aid to Jordan, which manifested itself either in direct aid to the budget or in remittances of Jordanians working in the Gulf, or in investments by the private sector in the Gulf in Jordan. All of these went down dramatically. And so if you want the welfare state model, the rentier state model for the economy has all but disintegrated. When COVID-19 came, it deepened that situation. It resulted in a dramatic increase in unemployment. Unemployment before COVID-19 was 19%. Today, the latest official figures are 23. I would think they are more like 30%. Youth unemployment before COVID-19 was around 33%. Today, it can easily go up to 50%. That's a real time bomb when 50% of your youth cannot find jobs. And so we are in a very difficult situation. On top of that, we are dealing with a refugee crisis. A severe refugee crisis. As you said, at least 1.2 million Syrians are in the country. The international community is helping, but again, not enough. And there are things you cannot help with. Jordan is already very water poor, if you will. We are the second poorest country in the world in terms of, per capita share of water before COVID-19. Now, on top of that, you have to find water for an additional 1.2 million. And so the economic model is disintegrating. The problem, Nicholas, is that while the country now talks about a self-sustaining economy, an economy that depends on itself rather than depending to a large degree on assistance from the outside world, depending on yourself is not just an economic concept. It also requires opening up the political space, because people are not going to agree to more economic sacrifices unless they also feel they are part of the decision-making process. So the political space has been relatively closed, and the system has been, and that's not unique to Jordan. It actually, you can see it in many Arab countries. There is a resilience to opening things up. There's a feeling that the cost of reform is greater than not reforming. And so we better, stay with the status quo. But because of all that, we are in an interim period where the old order has died, but the new order has huge problems being born.
Yeah, I must say, I mean, on our trips to Jordan, we've seen some very exciting things. We've seen young people doing, for example, some computer software training, and appearing very dynamic, very motivated, and you could see potential for small sparks, small initiatives, companies doing very well. But the thing that really strikes one is the dependency of people on the state for employment. 60% of all jobs come essentially from the state. And just to remind everyone, Jordan is a monarchy. It's the king has the power to dismiss parliament. And so in terms of political freedoms, and particularly press freedoms are fairly restricted. Marwan, there was some trouble earlier this summer as well. I'm just thinking about those political tensions coming to the fore. The Muslim Brotherhood has, after being tolerated for a long time by the Jordanian government, has been, have they been banned, or I think they've been sort of pushed out of politics, and there was a lot of pressure on Jordan to do so. So that's one issue. And then there have been strikes with teachers being imprisoned when they went on strike earlier this summer. So could you just go back over some of those political frictions, tensions that have been appearing over the last few months or so?
Sure. The Brotherhood has not been banned, but there are a lot of restrictions on their activity. But beyond that, Nicholas, what COVID-19 has resulted in, again, this is a phenomenon that we're seeing not just in Jordan, but throughout actually many, let's say, authoritarian governments around the world, is that there is a tendency to use authoritarian measures to deepen the state control over society rather than the opposite. And because of COVID-19, we've seen a lot of restrictions on the freedom of the press, on people's right to organize, on political parties, etc. Again, as I said, there's a feeling that stability is not going to be maintained by other than force. And the other argument, which says that stability, long-term stability, can only be attained through opening up the system and giving people a voice, is not an argument that the current ruling class in Jordan believes in. And so we have seen, again, particularly since COVID-19, we have seen a further restricting of all political activity. We are today on the verge of new parliamentary elections. So far, the polls show that 71% of Jordanians do not intend to participate in the elections, not because they don't believe in parliament, but because they don't believe that under the current situation that parliament is going to be independent or representative of their voices.
This conversation about political and economic reform goes back decades. Under King Hussein, there was similar talk in 2004, 2005. I think you were in control of a reform, an economic and political reform movement that again really doesn't seem to have come to much in the end. I know you moved on to other things afterwards. So that. What amazes me is that despite the fact that those reforms never come to fruition, and that the old guard essentially retain control with the security services still, keeping us of heavy influence over things, that people don't, revolt. Jordan was the one place that didn't have an Arab Spring. And do you see that changing? Do you see a risk of that happening? I mean, certainly there must be a risk, but it always amazes me that it doesn't happen.
Well, we did have protests, not as wide and encompassing as the ones that took place in other Arab countries. We did have protests. Most Jordanians today, still want the monarchy. The monarchy is a popular institution. What they are calling for are changes within the system, but not outside it. So that explains why we have sort of been less violent, less turbulent than other Arab countries. But Nicholas, the last 10 years, we have seen the state, in my view, losing two of its main tools to keep social peace. I call them the carrot and the stick. the carrot of financial resources, which were made available largely by aid from the Gulf. We lost that in 2014. Saudi Arabia has not given Jordan a penny in 6 years now. Remittances are going down because of the decline in oil prices, also because of COVID-19. Investments from the Gulf are going down dramatically. We also lost the stick of the fear of security services. After 2011, people are less afraid to go on the street and voice their opposition and frustrations as before. So these were the two tools mainly used by the system. You know, the financial tools and the security tool. These are no longer sufficient to keep social peace, particularly after COVID-19, when unemployment might rise to, you know, alarming degrees. It's not going to be, you know, we don't have a Saudi Arabia to bail you out. You have to compete for more loans from the international community with everybody else on the market, because every country is facing the same problem. So your ability to address the problem through, you know, through financing from the state has gone down tremendously. The state, as you said, cannot employ more people. Actually, 42% of the working force in Jordan are working in the public sector. The state cannot employ more people. And so you are in a new situation today where you have reached a limit, in my view, of what you could have done in the past to maintain social peace. Now you need a new social contract. You need a contract where people are more of participants in the decision-making as before. Because the economic situation is not going to be eased anytime soon. We still are facing, I would say, 10 very difficult years. You could face them if you feel you are part of the solution. But if people feel that the state, you know, only taxes them more in order to address the economic situation without allowing them a voice in decision-making, then I'm not sure this is a formula that will keep social peace.
I think this is fascinating. I think we all recognize around the world that COVID-19 is a seminal moment in history, you know, both politically and economically. It's going to have a tremendous impact on all our lives. And here we are focusing on a country like Jordan, where the legitimacy, if you like, of the government was already so slightly tenuous, and now with extra challenging circumstances, how it's handled in the next, you know, few months, years or so is going to be critical to the state's outcome or the stability of the government. I think it's very, very interesting. And I will note that this summer, when there was the teachers' union went on strike, all the heads of the teachers' union were imprisoned. And then when the teachers came out, came out in protests in support of them, and they then were arrested on large scale. So far, the government certainly doesn't seem to share your analysis of how to deal with the situation.
Oh, certainly not.
Yeah. So let's bring in some questions, and the questions are not just about Jordan; they're across dealing with the whole of the Middle East. We've got Diane Cook, who's there, and then followed by Hilary Matthews. So Diane Cook, I know, is in the UK, and I think your question is more about Iran. Go ahead, Diane.
Good afternoon. Yes, I'm just as an aside, I think you haven't talked about Jordan's hosting large numbers of refugees, Palestinians and Syrians, when some other countries do not do as well. My thought, when you were talking about the recent rapprochement, if that's the correct word, with the Israelis and the Arabs, could you say something about the role of Iran? Because some of the reports are that either as an actor itself or as the bête noire of the Sunnis and the Americans, to what extent are we seeing a kind of alliance against Iran?
Thank you, Diane. a large reason why these agreements were struck in the first place is Iran. There is, among Gulf states in particular, a great fear that Iran is interfering in Gulf affairs in a number of places, whether it is in Yemen or Syria or other places, Iraq. So there's a large fear that Iranian influence and Iranian potential nuclear capability is going to be a big threat to Gulf states, particularly the small ones like Bahrain or the United Arab Emirates. And so these agreements were struck with Israel more as a sort of an alliance against Iran rather than any attempt to move the peace process forward. As I started my talk by saying, I don't think they would move the peace process forward. But certainly, all of them were struck because of Iran. The cooperation with Israel over Iran is not new in the Gulf, by the way. It has been going on for quite some time, I would say decades, including in Saudi Arabia. These two agreements have only publicized what has already been going on for a number of years, and where Saudi Arabia might not be in a position, at least today, to do the same. That is, make the cooperation public because of many factors, the fact that this is not a land for peace agreement, etc., does not mean that the Saudis are not equally involved in cooperating with the Israelis because of Iran, as the UAE and Bahrain. So it's very much an anti-Iran alliance, if you will, than a pro-peace alliance.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, I think the way in which Israel's managed to bring the Arab nations on side is very impressive, and it's a huge shift in regional politics. Let's move, bring in some other questions. Hilary Matthews, we've covered this in part already, your question, but there may be more to say about it, and this relates to Jordan's official position on the two-state solution. Go ahead, Hilary.
Yes, I just wondered what the Jordanian government's official position is with regard to the two-state solution, or how they feel the whole situation could be resolved. And as an aside, having been to Jordan a couple of years ago, I presume that one of the biggest problems with unemployment that you have is with the lack of tourists now due to COVID. And all those cruise ships not pouring into Petra anymore. I assume those poor people have no jobs either.
So Marwan, I think that it's fair to say that the Jordanian government do feel undermined, and they've been pretty critical, at least publicly, of what Israel's been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. A two-state solution is crucial to Jordan. It's not just a matter of an official position. It's a matter, I would say, Hilary, of an existential position, in the sense that if there is no Palestinian state on Palestinian soil, Jordan has always been afraid that the Israelis might attempt a solution at Jordan's expense by calling Jordan as Palestine, or by moving a large number of Palestinians into Jordan if they don't want to keep a Palestinian majority in areas under their control. So Jordan has always had the two-state solution as the principal reason why it even signed a peace treaty with Israel. And today Jordan feels very, very threatened that this solution seems not just far away, but is being, like I said, almost killed. And Jordan is in a difficult position. It enjoys very good relations with both Bahrain and the UAE on one hand, but it also cannot sort of applaud an agreement that that Jordan sees is working against its own interests. And so the Jordanian position has been pretty muted in reaction to these agreements. And you're absolutely right about the tourism. The tourism sector has been the hardest hit in Jordan because of COVID-19. Petra, our airport is still closed, by the way. So there's no tourism coming to the country whatsoever. Restaurants have been closed for a long time. The whole tourism industry is going to take a long time before it recuperates. And it is a major factor why unemployment has gone up so dramatically.
Marwan, I'm going to bring some more questions in just a second, but are you aware of anybody spelling out what a one-state solution is, a united Israel and Palestine with equal rights? Are there organizations, are there groups who have said, right, okay, the two-state solution is dead. This is what we're looking at. This is a viable solution. I know of some groups within Israel talking about some kind of federation. What are you aware of?
There has been a number of activities, track 2 initiatives, if you will, mostly, of course, in the academic sphere that have been looking at this situation and looking at what possible one-state scenarios can emerge. Let's remember, today we are in a one-state reality. It's not a solution, but it's a reality today. So we don't even have to work for a one state. It's already there. Mm-hmm. The question becomes, if there is no two states, the question becomes, is this one state reality going to emerge into or develop into a democratic state or an apartheid state? That's the question, if there is no two state solution. So academics have been debating this issue. What possible solutions can come out? Of course, solutions that keep the question of equal rights. You cannot talk about apartheid solutions. That's not sustainable. There are a number of scenarios, Nicholas. One of them is what they call the liberal approach. One person, one vote, okay, in under the whole state. That obviously is going to end Israel as a Jewish state and end the Zionist dream, if you will, totally. Because as I said, the Palestinians are already a majority. And if it's a one person, one vote, then the Palestinians will take over in a very short number of years. There is the federation approach, which is being talked about, which means one person, one vote, but within two entities, a Palestinian entity and an Israeli entity under the umbrella of one larger state. That's the Swiss, for example, where people, where people have different sort of sub-states, federal states, and then in one arrangement. There are other solutions that are more complicated because geographically, it is no longer possible today to separate the two communities. You know, the settlers live in the West Bank, the Arabs live in Israel. So how do you come up with a solution that also takes care of people's rights without geographical physical separation? So there are a number of initiatives. Many of them have involved Israeli lawmakers and Palestinian lawmakers. All of them have been relatively under not under the table, but being conducted in an academic atmosphere, not in a political one. In my view,
sorry, it seems to me that there's the broad recognition that the two-state solution is dead has not really there yet, and that this debate is necessary, and that's what I'm surprised by. Why this hasn't moved on? Why is there this pretense that the two-state?
I'll tell you why. I mean, it's a very not just valid question, but it is a key question. Why is it that the international community refuses to acknowledge the obvious, which is that a two-state solution is no longer possible? The reason is that if you do publicly state that a two-state solution is impossible, then you will be forced to look at one state. And one state is very problematic. It's very problematic for all the sides. You know, the Israelis, of course, it's clear why it's problematic to them. But even to many Palestinians, who feel they have worked hard to establish Palestinian institutions and a Palestinian identity. They don't want that identity to melt into something else. And so what the international community, I'm arguing this point in an upcoming Foreign Affairs article. By passively supporting a two-state solution without doing anything to affect it, the international community is contributing to the death of that solution. Because what they are doing is just giving Israel, time to create more facts in the ground, as they are doing, to annex more parts of the land as they are doing. And, we keep saying two-state solution. Two-state solution is the best solution to the conflict. Just because it's the best solution doesn't make it happen. And I think we are all guilty, if you will, of killing the two-state solution by offering passive support to it.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. Let's bring in some more questions. There's a controversial question here coming from Anna Logan. We'll just need to unmute Anna's microphone to bring her in. When we've traveled around Israel and also in Palestinian areas, also meeting settlers, some right-wing settlers say the Palestinians have their own state and it's Jordan. And basically, our solution is, and I've heard people say this, they need to go elsewhere. They've got another country, that's where they can go. Now, that seems a ridiculous idea. How could you sanction the expulsion of a population, that you wouldn't be able to get away with it? Or would you? That's in this environment where there's so much political uncertainty, who knows what can happen. So with that preamble, I've got a question from Anna Logan. And then then you can respond to that, Marwan. So Anna, just go ahead and ask your question. Go on, Anna.
Marwan, this is right out of left field. I know this suggestion I'm making, but I feel that Israel has so lost its moral compass over the last 15 years that it might even consider this. Is there any consideration of the Jews in Israel sterilizing the Palestinians in order to keep the numbers down, as has happened in China with the Uyghurs?
Yeah, and I'm going to stop you there. I have not heard of anything like that. It sounds absolutely absurd and ridiculous. But Marwan, there have been fairly radical suggestions as I've just mentioned. Go ahead, Marwan.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that either. Sterilizing them. All I can say is that there is a considerable fear in Jordan that Israel indeed might either create conditions or make use of conditions such that a large number of Palestinians will move out of the West Bank and into Jordan. I used to say when I was foreign minister that this is, in today's age, this is impossible. Frankly, I don't say it anymore after Syria. 6.5 million Syrians left their country in 6 months. So it is not impossible to think of scenarios under which Israel can do this. And that remains Jordan's biggest fear. Now, the argument that because a large number of Jordanians are of Palestinian origin, therefore Jordan is Palestine, is equal to the argument that because a large number of Californians are of Mexican origin, then we can call California Mexico. It just, it doesn't work this way. But I also want to say that history has proven that the Palestinians are not going away. When in 1948, there were 900,000 Palestinians, 750,000 left, and only 150,000 stayed in what is today Israel. They didn't go away. Those 150 became 1.7 million today. And as I said, today, in few years' time, I bet you there won't be any Israeli government that can be formed without the Arab bloc in parliament, in the Knesset. So they're not going away. And in fact, they are being bolstered now by the presence of their cousins in the West Bank and Gaza, who, if you add them to the Arabs in Israel, like I said, become already a majority.
Mm.
So I'm not sure you can negate that by any means.
Okay. Coming back to your last question, I think one of the issues which is a significant part of the discussions about a possible peace solution, and that's the Palestinian diaspora, the refugees in places like in Lebanon. There's a significant population who still look to the Palestinian state, the ideas of Palestinian state, and the idea of return as a key part of their identity. So that's something that would have to shift and change necessarily in terms of the evolution of a new state within the region. Let's go back to one of the things you were talking about, Marwan, and that's the pressures on Jordan environmentally, the lack of water. And we've got Louise Tarrant, who's in Australia, and has got a question along those lines. So Louise, do you want to go ahead? Louise.
Sorry, Nicholas, slightly fake news. It's Yuri here.
Oh, Yuri.
Louise's
Okay,
partner.
Yuri disguised as Louise.
Yeah.
Go on, Yuri. Go on.
Thank you. I just wonder about the potential, as I understand it, Jordan is the leader in the Arab world around solar power, and
Yes.
whether or not, given the extensive landmass that's available to create solar farming, whether Jordan doesn't have the potential to become an energy powerhouse by exporting energy generated by solar power. And I do understand their kind of projects mooted where that solar power might be swapped with, say, desalination plants in Israel, so that there's an energy water swap in terms of dealing with the water poverty of Jordan.
Jordan becoming a solar powerhouse is a stretch, but you are absolutely right that we have a lot of landmass, a lot of sun, and that solar energy today is becoming a very important part of our energy source mix. Now, no country in the world has been able to make solar power the main source of energy. We're still far from that. Maybe one day we will become that, but it is part of the mix for sure in Jordan. There's, for example, there's not a single house in Jordan today that does not use solar energy, at least, for example, to heat water, at least. But beyond that, you have now mega projects that provide significant amounts of power that the government is buying from and then redistributing to people. But again, you're still talking, I don't know, 5%, maybe 10% max. You still have, so far, most of your energy comes from oil. Desalination plants is the only solution to Jordan's water problems, frankly. We cannot find any other solution. Today we are mining underground aquifers that are not renewable. So we're really, doing a lot of harm to the environment, a lot of harm, but out of necessity. We don't have a choice. We're waiting for a time when solar energy becomes, cheap and affordable to the point where we can use solar power to desalinate water, particularly from the Red Sea. There is a project that has been talked about for decades now without being implemented, which is a Red Dead Canal, a canal from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea, because the Dead Sea is 400 meters below sea level. That sort of canal would generate energy that can be used for desalination also. But all of these projects have not materialized as of yet, because they involve agreement on the Israeli side, which has not been forthcoming so far.
Right. Let's bring in another question, which follows up on the economy, from Nigel Harley. So Nigel, if you can hear, go ahead.
Yes, well, I think my question was sort of twofold, really. How the next 5 years is envisaged. Obviously, we've got now some information on the water situation, but obviously unemployment must be a massive threat given the figures that you mentioned.
Marwan, where will the money come from? Because you spoke earlier about the Jordan's dependency on aid, particularly from the Gulf and then Saudi Arabia, and that drying up. And Jordan really is dependent on international aid for its budgets, for its from year-to-year budget. So what happens next?
Well, the ability to bring money from the outside is now very limited. You know, the US gives us 1.5 billion a year. They've maxed out. I don't think they are in any situation to give us more. The Saudis have cut off all aid to Jordan, both not just for economic reasons, not because of their oil situation, but for political reasons. We're today, with the new leadership of MBS, we're not seeing eye to eye with the Saudi leadership. So the ability to bring money from the outside is really limited. Even getting loans from the outside is more limited than before because, as I said, we are competing with the rest of the world over resources. We will have to rely on internal sources. The best the best way is tourism. You know, the country has a lot of potential, unused potential for tourism, but that is going to require a new mentality of doing things. It's going to require the system to place more importance on the private sector, not the public sector. The public sector cannot be the main employer of people. The private sector has to pick up that. If the private sector is to pick up that, you need to change the legislative environment. You need to change the educational system and have people, you know, graduate people that are critical thinkers that can deal with the challenges of life, whether it's COVID-19 or otherwise. We are not doing that. That remains my main concern, and that's you know, some of the things that I've been very vocal about is that the country cannot be managed the way it has been before. If we were able to survive before because of all the reasons I outlined, these reasons are disappearing, and we need a new mentality that opens up the political system, that places more importance on the private sector, more importance on productivity. You know, oil has killed productivity in the Arab world. Oil has promoted a welfare state model for the whole region, which really has killed productivity. We need to look at these things in a much more serious manner than before. Are we going to do that? You know, if I have to judge by what is happening today, the system is not, you know, does not have this mentality. Are we going to be forced to do it because the resources are lacking? I hope so.
Okay, I guess Nigel's question really is, what happens if you don't do it?
Yeah.
If we don't do it, then you know, then we're hitting a wall. What can I say? This is not a sustainable situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the worrying thing is that you've got you've got quite a poor population. You've got a very poor middle class in Jordan, a very young population, and so far this is a country that has not fallen into the violence that its neighbors have. If you look at Syria to the north, if you look at what happens in Iraq, in a way, you know, Jordan has been a sort of an impossible bastion of stability. It's kept stable despite what's going around it. But you could imagine, and this is what the security services are afraid of, is mass demonstrations, unrest, you know, and turmoil. And it always amazes me that that doesn't happen, that people don't do that. And when they've got, you know, very, very little in their pockets.
It's true. And look, the leadership, you know, the monarchy in Jordan has not been brutal as some of the other systems in Iraq or Syria or elsewhere in the Arab world. So we've maintained a relatively open system that has worked for us in the past. That system was fueled, if you will, by either the security services or by money coming from the outside. These tools are disappearing, and we cannot keep saying because we've done things well in the past that we will continue to be able to do well in the future, because the conditions have dramatically changed.
Right. I'd love to get a few more questions in here, and I'm going to pick on, I know that Lynn Maddock, who's an economist who's worked within the Australian government and has done a lot of travel with us around the Middle East. I'd love to get Lynn's thoughts, maybe a possible question in there. So if Lynn is happy to do so, that'd be wonderful. It is getting late in Australia. I don't know what time is it in Australia now? Let's see, about, if it's 2 o'clock now, I think it must be about 11 p.m. there. So they're doing very well to be with us. Whilst Lynn comes online, if that's possible, give us your best hopes for the US administration. If there is a change in the administration, what do you hope for? If there isn't, give me your worst case scenario, Marwan.
Well, if I venture out of the Middle East and I will dare say that the whole cause of democracy is under fire here. If President Trump wins again, then it's going to be a very sad case for democracy, not just inside the United States, but across the world. It's going to be a sad case for global cooperation. So I'm very, very worried about a second Trump administration. We need to restore not just the trust gap that has evolved inside the United States, but cooperation with Europe, cooperation with the whole world, a mindset that really is threatening the very concept of diversity and democracy around the world. I will also say that I remain relatively optimistic that Trump will not win a second term.
What do you know that we don't?
Well, I don't know anything that you don't. The Midwest states, which were crucial for his election last time, are all against him today. The age group above 65 years old, which were largely with him, because of COVID-19 has turned against him. He has not shown the concern for life that this age group would like him to show. The polls show that Biden still maintains I don't want to say considerable, but a good lead over him. And so if you look at it state by state on a national level, if you parse the groups that were with him, I would say the odds are against him winning. That doesn't mean he will not win, but I think the odds are against him winning.
Yeah. I'm amazed by your ability to, talk not only about the Middle East, but, go into Midwestern politics. It's fantastic to have that overview. Lynn Maddock, I'm going to get a question from you because I always enjoy them. So Lynn, go ahead and say something.
Thanks, Nicholas. Hi. When we were in Jordan a couple of years ago, there was discussion about the monarchy, and it appeared we were getting hints that it was less popular than it had been in the past. Now, the monarchy is one of what you've been saying is one of the key struts to the stability of Jordan. Is the monarchy losing popularity? It was sort of hints of corruption, etc., that were coming through in terms of concern about the role of the monarchy.
So the current king is not as popular as his father, but this is not new territory. The popularity of the monarchy has ebbed and flowed since it was first founded.
Well, let me answer it sort of in one sentence. The monarchy remains popular in Jordan. The monarch is less popular. The monarchy as an institution remains popular. people see it as an umbrella, you know, because Jordanians are comprised of two major, you know, communities, the East Jordanians and the Jordanians of Palestinian origin. And they see in the monarchy an umbrella that sort of provides security for them all. But I have to admit that the monarch today is less popular than the monarchy and is way less popular than his father because of several issues. We can go into them. I don't think the situation is sort of at the brink. I still think it's salvageable, but I do think that the monarch, that King Abdullah, needs to change his ways of running the country in what I think has become sort of an outdated way.
Right. Well, Marwan, I think that's it. Thank you very much indeed. It's been a comprehensive discussion. I've really enjoyed it and learned a lot.